The Green Bay Packers go into Soldier Field behind Jordan Love. Talk about a love story, which you wrote about for Yahoo this morning. You are joining me from Chicago, from the Windy City. Can you put into perspective, Charles, the significance of Jordan Love in his first start as the face of the franchise, going into, of all places, Soldier Field, and showing that nothing's changed, the Packers still own the Bears?
Yeah, I mean, you only needed to be in the tunnel, honestly, afterward to see how big of a deal it was. And that's why I always say being on the ground and being able to see how a locker room reacts to a player really is important. And, you know, I sat there and I stood in the tunnel and I watched all these players come up. Brian Gutekunst, who obviously didn't have a great relationship with Aaron Rodgers at the end there.
Right.
And was, you know, a lot of problems. I mean, embracing every single player who came through. You know, and then when Jordan Love comes through, like a two-handed hug, you know, Gutekunst pats him on the breastplate, says, you know, great start. And at one point, you know, Rasul Butler's coming through, or Rasul Douglas is coming through.
Yeah.
And he says, in his own math, you know, 30 years, and then another 30 years, and now another 30 years. Now he's talking about the three quarterbacks. He's talking about, obviously, Favre to Rodgers to Jordan Love. But that was the kind of lift that I think the Packers got out of that performance, because you go in not knowing. I mean, you and I were at the owners' meetings. We stood there and we were like, we didn't know what Jordan Love honestly was going to be able to give to us.
Matt LaFleur was like, hey, he's not going to be Aaron Rodgers overnight. Like, you know, just so you guys know.
Yeah. And you and I were looking at each other like, that was probably not a great sign that he's pumping the brakes already. But I understood, because, you know, such an unknown commodity. And yet when I watched Jordan Love, I think over the course of that game, there were a few things that stood out to me. And number one, he didn't take a lot of sacks. I think he got sacked once. He threw the ball away at times. He was able to use his athleticism to move around and navigate the pocket. But really what stuck with me was he missed, and I wrote about this, he missed Luke Musgrave on a wide open, deep touchdown. I mean, it was there. And I mean, Musgrave was 5 yards behind the defense, and Love overthrew him. And you're just like, I mean, you could just feel it, like, oh God, like that's the classic, not, you know, maybe not ready for the moment. Like, is this what is going to grow to encapsulate this guy? He's going to miss wide open receivers, things like that. Next play out, hits Jaden Reed, rookie wide out of Michigan State, hits him in space. Reed goes for like 30 yards. Very next play. Yeah. And, you know, to me, I think the thing I've learned most from staffs with young quarterbacks that they harp on, but I really do believe is true, is when they make the mistakes, does it eat them up? Does it, you know, completely destroy the next, you know, the rest of the series, the next series after that, the series after that? Does it snowball? And when it doesn't, I think that's when you see the kind of growth that you can be excited about. And I think really that's what the Packers were excited about, to see him respond and come out in a game like this where there was a lot of pressure and play really well.
Mean, could you imagine if he shits the bed again at Soldier Field against the Packers' arch rival, first time out? What's being written, what's being said, what's being posted today? I mean,
it was Justin Fields, you know, right?
Right. He'd be just so yeah, I want to get to them in a second, but just on Jordan Love, also in reading your article and listening to you, I can't help but wonder if we haven't seen him play a lot, but he's been through some stuff. You know, like these 3 years behind Rodgers, not just learning from watching Rodgers or even learning directly from Rodgers, but just dealing with being behind Rodgers and all of that drama. It kind of hardened him and prepared him for this moment. But I want to go to you real quick before we get back to Fields. You could have gone to any game in the country. Why'd you go to Packers Bears?
You know, I think it was because you have, I like quarterbacks, especially, I mean, I don't know, just in general, I love covering quarterbacks, but I think these are two guys that there's so much loaded for their franchises in these two players. And Fields at times, and we talked about it last year, I mean, Fields at times was so dynamic and electric and, you know, just the unbelievable ceiling he brought to the table was something I really wanted to see out of the gate after the whole offseason of hype, right? And then and the reason why Love intrigued me was just because we haven't seen him. Like we've gotten these limited snapshots, and then you're not really able to see him a ton in practice, and we've never seen him with full ownership, right? Like it was always sort of like, Aaron Rodgers, he had the keys from Aaron Rodgers for a little bit. It's different when you take over the team, especially after the offseason that the Packers had. How do you respond to that pressure? And again, remember, he was a first round pick. Where when you and I covered that draft, like he was a player who I remember at one point heading into the draft, there was some heat where it's like, hey, he could be a top 10 pick. Like there were some teams that really liked him, and then he ends up falling into the Packers' lap. So plus there's the intrigue of like, could they really realistically, could this franchise pull off 3 straight quarterback successions without a hiccup? No, we don't know. Right. We don't know if that's happened yet, but this is a good start, right?
Yeah. So, but Fields. So, and we got to, let's do our obligatory contextualizing here. There's some of it's real and some of it's week one. We don't want to overreact. But having said all that, how bad was it? How bad a look was that for Chicago, given everything riding on Justin Fields?
Well, let me say this. Like I always say, week one's a fantastic liar, right? And I'll give you a little bit of context here. Okay. 1 year ago, coming out of a game, there was a marquee quarterback who opened week one, questions, but hey, it had been an off season where now the coaching staff was in tune with this player. There had been offensive additions. The whole off-season program, there was some hype in training camp about it all turning around. And then Trevor Lawrence went out and lost to Carson Wentz in the Washington Commanders.
So I was like, which one's he talking about? Because that could be a lot of people. Like it feels like
Well, but it was a Trevor game Lawrence, where it was like Wentz threw 4 touchdowns. Like Wentz dug himself a hole, but then he threw 4 touchdown passes, brought them back at the end in the fourth quarter. And meanwhile, like Lawrence, it was like, I think he completed like 57% of his passes. He threw a touchdown pass, but he sailed a couple wide open touchdowns in the end zone. And it was sort of like, man, I don't know. We're seeing some of that same stuff we saw to Lawrence last year. Like, this is concerning. Why is this happening? How frustrating is this for Jacksonville? This feels like the season before. And then, we lose all of it over the course of the season because of what the rest is history, right? Yeah. So when I watch Fields, you try to temper it. And that's actually, it's funny. It's because I'm working on this piece right now is like, hey, let's temper this. Now, are there concerning things with Fields? Yes, there are. The Quay Walker pick 6, when you watch the cut-ups on it, he like literally stares Walker into the play, walks him right into it. Like Quay Walker's in space, just watches Fields' eyes, boom, picks it off, runs it in for the pick 6. And so there were some of the things when you talk to people about Fields heading into this season, about where that development is. I talked to a pro personnel guy who had done some advanced work on Fields, and he said, look, one of these things that he's got to get over is he called him a first read or run guy. Like, as in, he looks down his first read. If it's not there, he's already thinking, like, how can I run? How can I start to move and take off and do something with the ball? This guy basically was like, look, he's got to be a first read, a second read. And then once the toolbox gets to the run in the third read or even the fourth, that would be great. But what it's going to take to get there is he's got to learn to use shorter stuff. He has to learn to use what the defense gets him. And then even one step more than that is just let go of the ball, get it out. Like, don't wait. And you did see some of that against a really, frankly, I think a good Packers defense. We're going to figure out.
So it wasn't just a leaky offensive line.
Offensive line wasn't good.
Fields. Yeah.
Some of it was on Fields. The offensive line wasn't good, but there were throws that Fields missed that were there. Like there was, DJ Moore, there was sort of this like out route in space, misses it. Fields goes underneath. Again, locking on to like one target. Throwing shorter stuff rather than letting plays develop at times. And then again, it's just sort of that kind of telegraphing at times of plays that I think really hurt him. And, but again, I'll say this, Green Bay defensively, there's some dudes, their front seven flies around. Their linebackers are really, really good. And Jair Alexander, I think one of the most important things they did, and the Bears are going to face this moving forward, Packers were like, we're taking Jair, we're sticking him on DJ Moore. So we're just going to take DJ Moore away. We saw the preseason. We saw the shit they like to do with him. So they stuck Jair on him, and that became a problem.
Yep. They need an alternative. They need a plan B. Hey, thanks so much for kicking it with your main man, Michael Smith. Be sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel, but also subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Rate it, review it, tell your friends about it. Oh, and be sure to follow me on social media.